You're listening to propsHR, an engaging startup. I'm your host, Cindy Windsor, along with my husband, Brad. We hope you'll follow our journey as a tech startup for employee recognition software with a social conscience. In addition to talking about our startup journey, we'll also talk about employee engagement and corporate charitable giving. If you'd like to learn more about our product, visit our website at propshr.com. Hey everyone, I am Cindy Windsor.
And I'm Brad Windsor.
And we're here with Erich Kurschat of Chicago HR Mastermind and Harmony Insights. He works with individuals and organizations on effective communication in the workplace. Welcome, Erich.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Today's topic, of course, is our favorite topic, company culture, and you're quite adept at it as well. So what companies do you think are doing culture well?
It's a good question. Sometimes they're hard to find.
Yes, yeah.
But I think the one that usually sticks out for me is Zappos. A lot of people familiar with Zappos as a shoe company. And actually, the CEO, Tony Hsieh, has said, I'm paraphrasing, but along the lines of, if you think of us as a shoe company, you've gotten it wrong. We're a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. And I think that's fantastic. If you know Zappos, I don't think they do huge sales. I don't think they're big into discounts, etc. Where they really focus their energy is on their customer service, and which is an indicator of what their company culture might be. You hear these little things that they've done, like there are these stories about spending 8 hours on the phone with a customer along the way.
Wow.
Heard that, which is funny. Someone in an executive office sees a thing like that. They go, "Oh, that's a problem."
Yeah, right.
So,
we got to trim this down.
Yeah.
Well beyond the 3 minutes you're allowed.
Really.
They had a huge hill to climb too. When Zappos came out, I couldn't imagine anybody would order shoes over the internet. I was just like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But their service was so awesome that.
Yeah, as long as I can try them on and return them. But
yeah.
I'm like you. I want to go into a storefront. I think I read that they had a customer. They learned that a customer's mother had passed away, and so they sent flowers, to the funeral or to the services. So you might think, well, that's for show, and possibly on the surface, some of that could be superficial. But then you start to learn more about the company and hear about what they do and read about them, and you realize that this is something that's very much part and parcel of who they are as an organization and embedded in their company culture in a very unique way.
Well, it sounds like their employees are really empowered. So they're empowered to stay on the phone for 8 hours or to order the flowers for that customer.
Yeah.
And, I think as, we all have been employees at different companies, that having that empowerment, that shows that the company trusts me. They trust what I'm bringing to the table. So I must be valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have a corporate HR background, and the company I worked for 16 years, we would do regular engagement surveys, and that was kind of the word that was being thrown around. How engaged are our employees? And then the year before I left, it was engagement and enablement. So it wasn't just enough to measure how engaged people were, but you wanted to measure, did they feel enabled then to do their best work?
Right.
Because you could be engaged, but if your supervisors aren't enabling you to do your best work, it's not going to get done. Yeah, it'll be frustrating if anything.
Or if you don't have the proper tools in place, so maybe your system's outdated and it's very painful for you to get work done.
Yeah.
I remember that at the company I worked at previously, when they started allowing a lot more telecommuting, one of the biggest things was they wanted to empower those employees by ensuring they had all the things they need, a headset, they had monitors at home, they had everything they need to get the same work done at home that they could at the office.
Yeah, right. Those tools, and that could be so simple. And such a simple indicator of what you can expect of the company culture. If you go up to your supervisor and say, this is something really simple that I could use to do my job better, and they either say no, or they have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get it for you, or there's like a book of policies and procedures that lets them know whether or not they can allow you this tool, then I would question, how are you set up to really empower and enable your employees to do their best work?
In 1986, I was an HR coordinator for a call center. This is a market research call center. And part of my job was running papers back and forth. I had to, it was all paper back then, binders, 3-ring binders, all this junk.
Yeah.
And there was a 3-ring hole punch on the other end of the office, like 50, 60 yards down the thing. And I was in there 20, 30 times a day punching holes. And so I asked the office manager, I said, may I have this $12, I found it like in the Uline catalog, whatever. I said, can I have this $12 hole punch?
Yeah.
He said, no.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Like it's a hole punch, just like the stapler on, Office Space, where the guy's like, just don't take my stapler.
It's like, to be told, exactly, it was just like a Milton moment, or whatever that guy's name was.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be told that I wasn't actually worth a $12 3-hole punch. It put me in my place.
Well,
I was an hourly employee, and they figured, whatever.
And back in the 80s, you didn't yet have a Fitbit to at least log some steps.
Exactly.
Right. That would have been the silver lining, and you didn't even have that.
Yeah, it hadn't been invented. Didn't have a cell phone yet. It's awful. But anyway, I digress.
Well, that's a good point, though, because then whether or not you stayed at a company could come down to your ability to procure a 3-hole punch,
Yeah.
Right?
I was engaged. I worked hard. I was, whippersnapper.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but those are the little message then,
Mm-hmm.
little and sometimes bigger messages that we get in the workplace to let us know very clearly what the culture is that we've gotten ourselves into.
Yeah. In fact, this was a case. There was a caste system at that company. If you were on one of the satellite offices, you were treated about like that. But eventually, I went to the corporate office, and they gave you business cards, free sodas, all that stuff.
All the 3-hole punch things
all
that you
the
could
tools
want.
you need.
Yeah.
Of course, at that point, I probably never used a 3-hole punch again. I was in the technology.
Other people did.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a whole different deal. So it's like these are the people who are treated well. I was in that group after a few years, but then in that satellite office, it just felt like a number.
Yeah.
12, whatever my number was, it wasn't higher than 12.
Well, I want to get back to Zappos for just a minute because I believe, Eric, last time I saw you, we were at a roundtable discussion for Chicago SHRM, and you brought out this book by Zappos. Explain it a little bit.
So I had heard along the way, and this was about 2011, if I remember correctly, that Zappos was kind of a force to be reckoned with in terms of their company culture. And I was just fascinated. Being in corporate HR, I wanted to learn more about this. And I heard about this book that they supposedly put out that was available for sale. And that if you wrote to them, they would send a free one. And I thought, well, I'll just write to them, see if they're actually going to send me a book. First of all, does this book actually exist?
Yeah.
I got to get to the bottom of this.
What company puts out a book just about their culture?
And I was like, I got to order one. So I got one. And to my surprise, it was like £10. They had paid for shipping. Mm-hmm. And if you turn it over to the back, you would see that they have a price sticker on it of $30. So this is a company that has a culture that could be bound in a book that they would give away for free and pay for shipping and handling on a pretty hefty book. And then also, in some cases, charge $30 for it. And my mind was blown at that point. I received it and flipped through it, 300, 400 pages, whatever it was, of basically employee testimonials. And it wasn't just like 2 pages of that and then the rest of it was marketing material. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of it was employee testimonials. And very honest, some people, from what I remember, most of them were positive, but very honest. You could tell that there wasn't any censoring and editing going on, etc. And I was blown away that any company could have any kind of culture that they would then want to put unedited into a book and get out into the public and put a $30 price tag on.
Oh, actually, you have people doing witch hunts over bad Glassdoor reviews, and to actually put this stuff out voluntarily is amazing.
Yeah?
It's really gutsy, actually. So you wonder, would they have made it if not for their incredible culture? Because I thought it was a crazy business idea. I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, they ended up being acquired by Amazon. So Amazon saw, hey, you're doing with shoes what we're doing with everything else. Let's, it seems like a good fit. I don't know the details of that acquisition. I do know that Amazon then chose to continue certain practices that Zappos had become known for.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, what are you...
So one of the big things that Zappos was credited for having done first is sort of this pay-to-quit model where they, when you go through their training program, several weeks, to the point that you're going to be offered employment, or maybe you're already employed at this point, and they say, okay, you've been through the training program, we can move you into some sort of role. If you don't want this role, we will pay you, I think, initially, I don't know what it was when it first started, but at some point it was about $3,000. Mm-hmm. So they would say, it's important enough. We are almost defining our culture, not necessarily just by who's employed with us, but by the people who are not, or who select themselves out of the process. And to think that you could get so far through the training and then decide, well, you know what, this $3,000 check is more valuable to me than a position with your company, probably saves Zappos money down the road in the long term.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because
service,
one fewer disengaged employee that they have working for them. But in a weird way, it helps them define the culture by the people who are choosing not to be a part of it. So that caught on. I think Amazon picked up that same practice. Other companies are doing it now, and I've heard of just sort of a general pay to quit practice where no matter how long you've been with a company, there may come a time in any given fiscal year where you're given the opportunity to walk away with a check in your hands. And so the company that I read about that was doing this, and I don't recall off the top of my head who it was, says it's almost like an annual performance review for us. If people take that check and run in greater numbers than we expect, something's not right.
Yeah. And it doesn't make sense. This is kind of the opposite of what they used to do in the 80s. I was actually working in the 80s. Big companies like IBM would hire 1,000 tech graduates. And it was the opposite, though. They would tell you to leave through the training process. So the candidates had no control over this. This is, that was when they'd start with 1,000, and then about 200 would get real jobs at the end of this whole training.
Yeah.
They did it with a lot of technical jobs.
Yeah.
And you don't hear about that so much anymore. This is better. I like this better.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember at MCI in the 90s, MCI, if that doesn't date me, MCI in the 90s, when, it was like every year they have their Black Friday or Black Monday or whatever they called it, where they let go of X percentage of employees. And it was always such a scary time. Like doing something more like what Zappos is or Amazon now is doing, that gives everyone a better feel for it. It's not something you dread. Like, okay, I have an opportunity. I know I want to go somewhere else. I'll take this pay. I'm happy. They're happy. There's no ill will. And
that's a great point. I mean, it is, I think ultimately it's building, not only defining their culture and who they are as an organization, what they value, but it's building goodwill among people who aren't employees.
Yes.
That it's like you don't leave saying, oh, that's such an awful company. But you're saying, well, I can't really say too much bad about a company that gave me a check on the way out the door instead of a lot of companies that it's a foot to the behind.
Exactly.
Instead of that, you get a check as you go, and even if it's your choice. I mean, so much about that, and that doesn't even scratch the surface of the company and what they're doing and what's important to Tony Shea ultimately, but I think that really says a lot for how invested they are in the public perception of who they are as an organization.
Yeah.
Well, it goes both ways, too. You want to look good to your customers and take great care of them, but they probably hire a lot of people, right? They have pretty big staff.
I would think so.
There.
Yeah.
It can be very hard to hire if you don't have a nice public face.
Yeah. And so if they're then enabling and empowering their frontline people, which I'm just going to define as the people that are on the phone, do the customer service, to the point that you made earlier, you were that frontline HR coordinator who couldn't get the 3-hole punch that you needed. Here's a company who is saying to their frontline people, we are going to empower you. If you need to spend 8 hours, spend 8 hours. If you need to order flowers, order flowers. I mean, I worked for an organization in food service hospitality where people had the freedom to go above and beyond. And so there are, examples every single week, every single month, an event of, this couple that had always come to a particular stadium club and they're coming back to celebrate their 50th anniversary. And an hourly employee takes it upon him or herself to, go across the street and get a special etched glass to bring back in. And, when you feel empowered to do those sorts of things, I think then that's where the loyalty comes in. That's where the trust comes in, because you say, I work for a company where culture is important and I'm an important piece of that puzzle and more likely to stay as a result.
And we've all heard of the term key position, right? And I think a lot of people get it wrong. You'd think, oh, the CFO is a key position. At a company like Zappos, I bet they categorize their call center workers the key position.
Key positions, right?
Yeah.
These are the ones who handle your customers. In fact, I talked to someone at a gym. I hadn't thought of, this is in relation to propsHR. Engagement's extremely important in a gym because personal trainers handle your customers. And if they're not engaged, it all goes down.
They quite literally handle your customers.
Yes, literally. But it's absolutely a key position.
They're the forward-facing of the company,
Do you know at Walt Disney World what the key position is?
The groundskeepers, right?
People who clean. People who keep it clean.
Yeah.
And you may know that Disney is well known for their training programs. They're a model for
apprenticeships.
How to, how to train your staff, and other companies go to them to learn what that model is and benefit in some way. And it doesn't surprise me that you would say that.
Yeah, it's funny. I found that out a few years ago, and actually at the time I thought key positions were these high or really technical ones, but no, it's what's really important. Who's handling your customer.
Yeah.
Well, we talk about how obviously Zappos and Amazon have empowered their employees. Think about when companies don't do that, like when we look at United, if United had empowered their employees to go up to whatever amount to give people to exit a plane, then the most recent event of someone being removed from the plane unceremoniously would not have happened, and it wouldn't have caused so much.
Right.
Clearly somebody in that chain of command should have been able to approve a larger, whatever they call it, the thing.
You would think so, and I certainly don't know the details. I have a good friend who's been a long time flight attendant for United, and there's so much behind that story that I might not be aware of. But of course, all you see is the video that comes out. But there's another point to be made about that. Yeah, whether or not they could have offered more, which arguably they certainly could have. I would rather have offered more than experience the backlash they did. But this is a good point about the extent to which leadership impacts and influences culture. I think it's pretty widely agreed upon that Oscar Munoz, the CEO, his first statement was not very well received. That we regret having to reaccommodate or whatever it was. Yeah. And I don't want to focus too specifically on this example, but I think it took 3 tries. I think by the time his third statement came out, like reading it, I was impressed. I was like, this is what it should have been. I really, how this was positioned, whether or not he wrote it or had help, this is what should have come out. Yeah. The first time, and you start to think about then the extent to which company leadership really does impact not only company culture, but public perception of company culture, regardless of how it actually is inside, how it's perceived. On the outside can make all the difference, and I don't think he did himself or the company any favors with the first draft.
That was terrible. In fact, the third one had the one sentence that it needed to have. Our policies got in the way of our values.
Yeah.
That was it.
I loved that.
Bad policy, it was the problem.
It was so honest, and you have then in that one sentence a certain vulnerability, right? To say, hey, we're not perfect. When you're talking about leadership, then Steve Jobs with Apple, like it was pretty widely known that he was fairly type A, pretty rigid about things, pretty intense, I guess, to work for. And he would never have apologized for anything. Everything would have been repositioned. So then he passes away, and they have the whole Maps debacle. You remember that?
Yes.
Then Scott Forstall, I think is his name, who was involved in some way with product development, and comes out on stage and says, I'm sorry. Like, we botched this. And not only am I sorry, but here are our competitors' applications. Go use them.
Use them for now.
And I'm thinking Steve Jobs is not happy wherever he is using them. But I think that said something about a culture shift from Steve Jobs to, was it Tim Cook? Afterwards?
Yeah.
And they empowered Scott and other people then to get up on stage in a very public light and say, we're sorry.
Well, Tim Cook is fallible.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Right? Steve Jobs wasn't, I don't think.
Right. And that infallibility got Apple to where it was, so that we have to give him props, so to speak, for how far he got with that. But I really appreciated the Apple 2.0 that came out and said, hey, we're not perfect. We are sorry. Here's something else to do while we work on our application, getting it back up and running so that people aren't following it and driving off a cliff. Like, I don't know how that happens to begin with.
Yeah. You should really be looking.
I don't care how much I trust my GPS. If it tells me to turn right and that's going to take me off a cliff, I'm probably not going to do it. But no judgment. No judgment.
Yeah, we can use that for a while. In fact, Steve Jobs took it so far that they called the field around him the reality distortion zone. Have you heard that?
Oh, no.
That term, and it means that he'll have a brilliant idea that's ludicrous. But since you're with him, if he thinks it's a great idea, you now think it's a great idea. So people go out with these kind of deluded concepts, and they've just been sucked into the reality distortion zone.
Yeah.
Everyone who worked with him was aware of that.
Yes people. He surrounded himself with yes people.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if that led to an iPod, then fantastic.
There's still a lot of genius.
There's a lot of genius there. So going back to culture, and we talked some about how management and people higher up can affect the culture. How do you hire for culture without the culture
being too heterogeneous?
Yes, without the culture being too heterogeneous.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I've read stuff along the way, and especially in preparing for the Chicago SHRM Culture Roundtable that you referenced earlier, that there are a lot of companies that are taking a step back away from saying that they hire for culture, because that's been cultural fit, and that's been a big thing for a while, and still is. Companies saying, oh, you know what, we hire for cultural fit. I work for an organization that said that we can we can teach you any skill you need to be taught, but we can't teach you to be nice, So we're hiring then for that person who's going to come through the door smiling and wanting to serve our customers and guests.
Yes, smart managers hire for the soft skills because you can't program those.
Right.
You can't send someone to training and teach them respect.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. But you can certainly teach them a new programming language. Done that, in a couple months you can actually get them going. I'm sure.
But you do need the diversity in a company to make it a positive culture.
Right. But so then to say, well, we're hiring for cultural fit almost implies that, okay, we have a culture in place. I'm not going to bring you into the company unless you fit into what we already have. Everybody looks a certain way, everyone talks a certain way, and unless you look and talk that way, you're not that cultural fit. That's kind of the implication. And when you think about that and think it through, you're like, well, I'm not sure that's really the message I want to send. So what I'm interested in, certainly, and having learned through the research that I've done, is the companies that say, well, we're not going to necessarily hire for cultural fit, but we're going to hire for values fit. So if you value what we value, that's a good starting place. And if anything, rather than fitting in, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, to the culture, I want you to add to it. I don't want this to be a melting. What I heard somebody say, which maybe has been said for a while, but rather than being a melting pot, it's more like a gumbo. It's like it's a chowder of sorts, I suppose, where we don't.
You add more seasoning to it.
We don't want to bring you in and then have you melted into everything else that we already have established, but we want you to be an important individual component that adds to and enhances in some way a culture that we already have in place. So it's not to say that culture is by any stretch of the imagination a bad word, but I love this values fit, because that focus on values, I can't help but think of Stephen Covey talking about mission statements and values-driven organizations, etc. And there are other people who have written on that. But as soon as you're really keen on what your values are, suddenly you're defining your culture. And in that roundtable, when we were talking about defining culture, and I said, what words define culture for you? People were saying stuff like collaboration, cohesiveness, integrity, democracy, recognition, near and dear to your hearts, I'm sure, with propsHR. Respect, action, and behavior came up a lot. You can't just throw this stuff on a website. You can't just have your marketing people come up with what your culture is. It has to evolve from the inside.
And breathe it, and people have to experience it day in, day out.
For instance, I would advise against getting a ping pong table and a foosball table if you're going to come down and complain when people use them.
That's probably
mixed messages, right?
Yes, I've seen that literally.
Well, and some might say to you, but Brad, if establishing culture is all about taking action, like purchasing a ping pong table is taking action. That is telling everybody else what your culture is. What do you say to that?
You say use the ping pong table, and I won't complain if you do. I don't know. You don't just turn the culture around on a dime. This is a company that wasn't really ping pong, foosball culture.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the point ultimately, I think. Yeah. If you're not a ping pong company, bringing in a ping pong table that's not your solution.
Won't help you, no.
And I think there are a lot of organizations, I've toured some offices and saw, there's a ping pong table there, and then I look twice at it and I think, is that there because that's truly the culture of the organization, or is that a founder or a CEO or even an HR person saying, hey, we're not quite sure what our culture is. Let's bring in a ping pong table so that we have a culture by next week.
Yeah.
And then you get to promote that on your recruiting page. In fact, this company did foosball, ping pong, soda, all these nice things.
And if it's authentic, then I'm okay with it. And if it's a part of who you are, I toured the Mountain View Google offices with a friend of mine who has worked there for years, and he took me past the sleep pods and the ping pong tables and everything. And this was a while ago, at least a decade ago. And segways to get you around campus. And I thought, this is really fantastic. It seems very authentic and a part of your culture. And he said, yeah, but that also implies that a part of our culture is that we're not expected to leave. And of course he was exaggerating because they do promote work-life balance and blend. But he said everything is here. If I need to get a haircut, the barber's right down the hall. If I want to take a nap, I don't have to go home.
I am not sure how I feel about that. I remember years ago hearing about Microsoft. They had theaters, restaurants, all this stuff. I'm like, oh, how neat. I'm like, but wait. Ugh.
Yeah.
So it means that you never leave. And one of them actually had a program. What was it? It was actually gender biased. It was one of those nice programs that we found out about fairly recently. They had all these services, but no daycare. Meaning we don't care for parents.
It was Google's new office building that they're opening. Huge, complex. Is it Google? I'll have to check on that because I don't want to say anything, mistake something. But
you're going to lose sponsors.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, they can pull our AdWords. We'll just leave the name out.
But they have this huge, wonderful complex, but then no daycare.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's kind of one more piece to that puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to have a huge, lovely complex with all those things, well, it seems like daycare should be part of it as well.
You mentioned earlier the Chicago HR Mastermind meetup, and we had a mastermind meeting once where the challenge, the hot seat challenge that was presented to the group for feedback was, in our organization, we would like to, how do I put this? We're not promoting women into management roles. And actually, we're not promoting them, but they are not making themselves available as candidates for management roles.
It goes both ways, yeah.
Having, in large part, potentially to do with travel, and if they have children at home and they're primary caretakers, potentially if husbands are also out of the home working, we're trying to figure out what do we do to attract women to leadership roles. And as the conversation went on, we were talking about things like daycare in the workplace, and if the feedback you're getting from people is that they're not putting themselves out as candidate for those roles because they require daycare, well then that to me seems like an easy fix. And imagine then what how your culture is perceived if you say, positioning women for leadership roles, and men, it's certainly not just women, but there may be men who say, look, I'm responsible for staying home with our kids.
Right.
If you want me in the workplace, you have to accommodate me in some way. That says a lot, I think, about a company culture if you're willing to establish something like daycare as a service.
Yeah, and especially when you're putting so much money into all other aspects of it, but the daycare is missing. You have the barbershop, you have the restaurant, but the daycare is missing. You're
right.
Like, come on. So what do you think are some things that a company can do? Let's say if they're struggling, they feel like they're struggling with culture. So maybe on the short term, what are some things that they could do to help improve their culture?
Yeah. Maybe near term, long term.
It's certainly not going to be an overnight fix.
Right.
It's not a ping pong table.
No.
For example, it might be a 3-hole punch.
Would have gone one way in 1987.
It may be, but I think companies get it wrong if they think it's a quick purchase like that. I think it's potentially a long game. It's something that's going to develop over time. It has to be genuine and authentic. And I think it starts with open communication. So much of what I do is around meaningful work and meaningful workplace relationships. And I use the DISC assessment for a lot of the workshops and the coaching that I do. And so I can't help but come back to effective communication and just opening up those lines of communication and saying, you are important to us. It's one thing for us to say that you are. It's another thing for us to demonstrate it. So how then? I was speaking with a woman this morning who works for a company, and she said it's clear that there's tension. There may be a toxic culture, but we aren't empowered. Maybe we're not given an environment or a forum to come together and really talk openly and honestly about what our concerns are so that they can be fixed.
Right.
That's an issue. I was also on the phone recently with a company who wanted to bring me and a colleague in to do some training workshops for them. And after we got through a bit of the conversation, it was pretty clear to us that, prior to getting to that step, after having been through a number of mergers and acquisitions, they were still struggling with what is our culture?
Right.
We have several divisions in the company. There's a lot of organizations that have several storefronts or locations, and each one has their own culture. And then they're supposed to abide by the culture of the larger parent company. You can't shortcut the process. You can't jump too far ahead and say, well, we have all these needs, until your employees, at least in my opinion, first and foremost understand who is the organization that we're working for.
Right.
How do we fit in to this puzzle? Are we appreciated? Are our contributions appreciated and respected? Are we being rewarded in the ways that are important to us? At a very foundational basis, are the people that we report to, are they communicating back to us how we're doing, what our expectations are in terms of our performance? We could go on and on about that, but if you don't have that open communication in place, I think it's really then difficult to begin to define your value system and put together mission statements and write the copy that's going to go on your website and put it up on your walls. Those things can all be in place, but if they're in place because a marketing team has come together to come up with this stuff, I think you've missed the boat. That Zappos book is full, cover to cover, of employee testimonials.
Right.
And when you read the testimonials, it doesn't say VP of Marketing, VP of Sales. people at all levels of the company who said, this is what the culture means to me and how I feel I play into it. If employees don't have a sense of that bigger picture, then I think you have very little potential for success in defining what your organizational culture is going to be at the end of the day.
I think communication is so important, because I know, like, when I've worked at companies that have a really strong sense of communication, then I feel like I am part of that bigger picture. I know what's going to happen. I'm valued enough to understand what's going on. Like, they would even share financials, like sales, monthly, like, so you really understand.
It's a transparency there.
And it was after 9/11, and there was obviously an issue, and we had to lay off a few people, and then after that it was like, we're going to be really transparent with our employees to help them have a level of comfort with where we are and what we're doing with the business.
Yeah.
And I think that just meant so much to me. And then, you go to another company and you're like, you don't know what's going on from day to day. That poor communication, it makes you feel like, well, I'm not valued.
Yeah.
When you get a culture of fear, actually, this particular company had a fear-based culture where people made decisions based on fear.
Yeah.
And you know how much innovation happens at a company when people are afraid to make decisions? A culture that has fear wound in it is never going to work. And it's all tied in. If there's respect, there shouldn't be fear. Anyway,
that's right.
You can have them both.
In terms of a basic how-to, I would really start with what's foundational, and it's bringing people together, communicating very genuinely and authentically that every position in an organization is important, and that there are open lines of communication, and establish those systems. For some companies, it's a 1-800 anonymous 1-800 number that employees can call. For others, it's an in-person, face-to-face, meeting of some sort. It's a town hall or it's a mastermind. You can do those internally as well. Bring people together and say, hey, we don't have all the answers. You're an important piece of this puzzle. We'd love your feedback. How are we doing? When you do an engagement survey, don't do it and set the results aside. Act on the results that you get. And whatever you do, tie it very closely back to the effort that you took to actually solicit people's.
Right. If you don't follow up a survey with some type of action, then there's no point to the survey.
Oh, they start to see that pattern.
Yeah.
We have friends who go, they'll never go through with this. They never follow through. People get really jaded after a few failed to launch type initiatives.
Accountability is also a part of it, though.
Yeah.
If people are not performing at the level that the expectation has been set, and as long as it's been communicated clearly to them what that expectation is, you have to hold people accountable. You have to get to a point that the people that are working for an organization, you're being intentional about keeping them, and the people that you don't want working for the organization, you're being intentional about moving them along. Address issues in performance in a timely manner, but also reward the positive examples of performance in a timely manner. And I know this is near and dear to your hearts, but if you see things in the workplace that your company purports to value, when you see it, reward it in some way. And there are various systems that are in place for this, but be timely about how you're going about that so that people understand, almost as if you were, maybe this is an unfair analogy, but training a dog. If they do something well, not equating people to dogs, but if they're doing something well, you don't look at it, smile to yourself, and then next Thursday, reward them for it. In the moment, you say, hey, this is pretty fantastic what you've done. I want to recognize you in a way that you want to be recognized so that it's meaningful to you. Likewise, if you catch somebody doing something that is not in line with the values of the organization, take time in the moment to communicate respectfully to them.
Real time.
That they need this feedback.
Yeah, just like with a performance review, any of these things. An underperforming resource can be very toxic, actually, on a team. We've seen that. It's like a bad tooth.
And expensive.
Yes.
To the company, right?
And what's it telling the rest of the team? Why should I be motivated if this person is constantly dragging us down? We've seen that as well. You can't let those stick around too long.
Yeah, I think being timely with feedback is so important.
That's what I was going to get into. A lot of these companies, they're trying with appreciation. They have quarterly things, annual things, but it's not granular enough. These things are major.
And it's not public enough.
They try to do the big picture stuff, but no one really does the real time.
The day-to-day
the little things. Good job,
interactions.
Not only the day-to-day, I would add to that then also sometimes the reward system is based on what's important to either the person who designed the reward system or to the company or a higher up. So that $500 check, it's a cookie cutter approach to rewarding people. It's saying, I'm going to reward you. Of course, everybody wants to walk away with a $500 check, but sometimes it's, hey, you know what? Because we value here public recognition, we're going to pull you up on stage and pat you on the back. Yet the person that you're recognizing doesn't want anything to do with public recognition.
Right.
They'd rather do something be recognized and rewarded in a way that's more meaningful to them and their unique value system. And I think, and that's, being a fan of what you two are doing, I think that talking about what we are uniquely passionate about as individuals is often a no-no in the workplace. If I happen to really have a heart for supporting a particular organization, especially, God forbid, if it's sort of religious affiliated or anything else, that's kind of hot water. I'm not quite sure then as an HR practitioner, is this okay? Is it not okay? Should I allow it? It leaves people then coming to work with these very defined passions, but feeling as though they can't express them, that they're not going to be acknowledged in some way in the workplace because we have to scrub the workplace of any sort of anything that we're not quite sure if it's going to fly.
That is a hard hole to dig out of. Because I can think of people who say, I never believe anything that they announce. They never follow through.
Right? That's tough then, especially as HR practitioners, those of us who are or have been. You don't want to be on the end of that conversation where employees are saying you're just doing this for show, assuming that what you're doing is authentic and genuine. You want that to be the perception. So how do companies then do that? Not bringing in a ping pong table, but really do it in a way that allows you over time to be perceived as authentic and genuine in your approach.
That consistency, I think, the genuine nature of it will come out, if you're persistent with them.
Yeah, and preferably you can do it with your current CHRO and CEO. You use a lot of times, new management, then they try to build a new culture. But it'd be nice if you didn't have to get rid
Turn
of
people
really.
over. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If it could happen with the existing team organically.
And if we can agree that building a culture really is built in action and behavior, like people have said in the past, then how can you tie any action or behavior that you are taking back to values that everybody in the company has aligned with? I do a lot of leadership training, and we talk about the work of leaders being to craft a vision, align people with that vision, and then execute on it. And there are a lot of leaders out there who will skip one or more of those steps. If you have nothing to execute on, well, good luck. If you haven't aligned people, you have a vision and you want to execute on it, but no one's on the bus, well, good luck with that. But I really think the most effective leaders out there understand really what it takes to craft a vision, align people with it, and execute on it. And that's kind of boiling it down to simple terms, but each of those three components is really much more complex.
Right.
And the most effective leaders out there understand that different people want to be rewarded in different ways, and the extent to which I recognize that and can adapt so that I'm really connecting and building genuine rapport with individuals in my organization as I go, over time then a culture does emerge that we can put our finger on and say, yes, this is who we are, these are our values. And at any point, if you take action or you demonstrate some behavior that is not in alignment with those values that we've all agreed upon, you have a breakdown.
Right.
And I think all you have to do is turn on the news for about 5 minutes and you see examples of organizations and governments here, near and far, that are acting in a way that somebody might argue is not necessarily consistent with the values that have been agreed upon, And I think it makes for really interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this earlier. It kind of comes back full circle. I bet United's core values do not have a bloody face in them, right? They didn't want that. They really didn't want that.
I love your imagery.
All right. I think that's probably a good place to end on. Eric, real quick, do you have some upcoming events you'd like to share?
I do, as a matter of fact. Thank you for asking. So we've talked about Harmony Insights is the HR coaching and consulting company that I have, and I primarily give individuals and organizations the confidence of effective communication with diverse personality styles. Mm-hmm. So those are one-off engagements. I'm working regularly with individuals and organizations around communication. Kind of under the umbrella of Harmony Insights, then, I'm speaking regularly around Chicago on soft skill topics that involve communication or meaningful work. So effective networking with people, how to develop and present a pitch that resonates with your intended audience. Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm most excited about these days is the Chicago HR Mastermind. There are 3 chapters. There's the downtown chapter, a western suburbs chapter, and thanks to you two, now a northern suburbs chapter. The downtown chapter, which is the one that I lead and facilitate, is up to about 300 maybe even 40 members at this point.
Oh, that's great.
We have our monthly meetup. They're all free. They're through meetup.com. And of the 340 some members that we have in the downtown chapter, we've been bringing together about 40 people at a time to engage in a mastermind conversation whereby somebody sits in the hot seat, presents a real-life work-related challenge that they are having, and then has the attention of the rest of the group for a good 20 to 40 minutes to help them brainstorm potential solutions, connections, resources. It is building the local Chicago and now suburban HR communities of practitioners, service providers, students, and people in transition to really come together, build their networks, and help one another with real-world problems that they're having in the workplace.
Is there a particular website? I know you mentioned meetup.com. Do you have a website that...
If people search Chicago HR Mastermind through meetup.com, they should probably find all 3 chapters. But if they go directly to hrhotseat.com, they will go directly to the downtown chapter and can find the other 2 chapters through there as well. And what I encourage people to do is, even if you don't know if your schedule is going to allow for a monthly meeting, because we do schedule them month to month, simply registering for the group will allow you to receive communication going forward about when future meetups are scheduled.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
You have a lot of great insight on culture.
It's been my pleasure. This really has been fun to talk with you too.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, good conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, Internet.
Thank you for listening to propsHR, an engaging startup. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll follow our podcast and check out our website at propshr.com. Do you have a question about our startup or employee engagement software? Email us at info@propshr.com or tweet a question to us at propshr using hashtag propshrpodcast.